Welcome to Group Portia, the podcast that uncovers the hidden treasures within grief. I'm your host, Portia the producer, and I'm inviting you to join me on a transformative journey where we will exchange laughter, of course the best medicine of them all, reflect on cherished memories, remember that time that the little boy grabbed my hand instead of his mother's at the amusement park? Yikes. And of course discover gratitude while navigating one of life's hardest challenges, loss. So get ready to groove with me, Portia the producer. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Groove with Portia. I am your host, Portia Booker, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep up with the latest and greatest of all with Groove with Portia. So the other night, everybody, I was sitting at my computer and going through some old photos. You know how it is when you go down the old photo memory lane. You find pictures that hold their own grief attached to them. Right. And some of you know my story about when I had my TV career take a pivot and transition. And I just so happened to find a few old videos of when I used to anchor. And when I was sitting in the moment watching these videos, I felt a big sense of joy for the first time in years. And the reason being is because I've made peace with that story, right? Because that scar of what I went through in TV has left an imprint on who I am today. So today on Grew Up Portia, everybody, I'm joined by an amazing individual who I met through a mutual friend through Facebook, who is a professional certified coach. Also, they were a former fraud investigator and also in the United States Air Force. Thank you for your service. And they are on a mission to help high achievers to really cultivate joy into their life and also really find themselves through self-expression. So welcome, without further delay, Hélène Caniac. Hélène, welcome to Grew Up Portia. How are you today?
Hi, Portia. Thank you so much for having me. And I love that you started this podcast on a note of like gratitude and joy looking back, because that's exactly how I find myself feeling today, giving myself a lot of credit for every opportunity that's led to this moment and gratitude for the time you're giving me on your show and the opportunity for the conversation ahead.
Well, I agree. I think, we tend to bury, right, the pieces of us that didn't grow into the direction that we wanted to, right? When I think back to my TV career, it was short-lived. And I know that I was ashamed of that particular part of my life because I had a version of myself that I aspired to be. But realistically, that was the version of me that other people wanted and not what I wanted. Right. And so I'm curious, Hélène, what did it take for you to, no pun intended, investigate the pieces of your life that you found didn't bring you joy, right? You were in this very regimented on duty, right? And now you're in this space of flowing in what I call the self pool, right? The self direction of alignment. What did it take for you to shed that layer and really embody who you are today?
Beautiful question. And the answer to that is lots of wake up calls, right? It's kind of like that alarm going off, and then every now and then you snooze the alarm, and then another one comes in, and eventually, like you have that nightmare, and you wake up, and you're like, oh, I actually have to get to work now. It was very similar to that experience. The first major wake up call in my life that led to me having to reconsider my identity up to that point in life, like as a human being on this planet, was the passing of my mom, was, my loss of her about 11 years ago. And, her passing cracked open this external exoskeleton that I had built up, this identity of the strong, responsible one who never needed anything. And for me to shed that layer meant literally like kind of like a hermit crab leaving its shell. I felt very soft, very gooey, and I didn't know how to be a vulnerable person. I didn't know how to embrace vulnerability and view it as a superpower. I felt overly sensitive. No one knew how to help me because I never taught them how to help me. So I felt so disconnected I could not be the person that I was before because I was in such desperate need of care and love and nurturing that I would normally exclusively get from my mom, who was no longer with me. And so I had to learn not only how do I take care and love myself and rediscover all parts of me, including the soft, vulnerable ones that deserve to be seen and are actually a superpower. But then how do I take that and teach others how to take care of me because I have modeled the best way to do that. So that was like the big first wake up call. There were other little ones that are more like subtle, like, do you have any hobbies? And then realizing I didn't, and then panicking when a coworker is just casually like, do you have any hobbies? And it's like, oh, no, I got a whole career and I got no hobbies. I'm so sorry.
You know, Helen, of course, I know we talked about this when we first met about us sharing that connection of losing both of our moms. And I love how you brought up about that desperation of seeking that void that was once filled by the love from our mothers, right? You know, mother daughter relationships, some are more rough than other ones, but my mom was definitely my best friend, right? Like, I knew I could always find a sense of solitude and grace and love no matter what, and get that piece of advice. My mom always said, you make the best of it. Make the best of it, darling. And I love how you also brought up, Helene, how you had to learn to love yourself, right? Really put into yourself the things that your mom used to do, who can no longer do that because she's no longer physically here. And can you share with our audience, Helene, what does your love language look like for Helene today? Because I think so many people don't realize what their love language is. And that, I think, continues to funnel the disconnection.
That's a beautiful insight, Portia. I think growing up, I would have labeled my love language as um, self-criticism. Like I grew up half French and half American, and the French are very good at being a critical, like always looking for what could be a little bit better. And even in my family, my mom and my dad, they raised me with this, what could be improved. If I came home with like a 98% on a test, they're like, but what about the other 2%? Like, how could we have improved that? And so I really had a strong relationship to my inner critic. And that used to be not just how I loved myself through the language of self-improvement at all costs, but it's also what led to me. It was how I was in my friendships, right? I'm the person you would call when you wanted candid feedback and you wanted someone to hold you accountable to a better version of yourself. Now, did I turn that into my career? Yes. But I've also shifted it so that it's not just critical for the sake of improvement, it is present for the sake of fulfillment. And so my love today for myself prioritizes what I am present to. So my capacity, my pleasure, like what can my body do right now? What do I want? Like genuinely, what would bring me pleasure, joy, and fulfillment? And then once I know those things, what steps can I take to sustain that in a sustainable fashion? So rather than just burning out for the sake of accomplishment and achievement and bullying my way into the next, milestone, I love myself today by listening to myself first and foremost, listening to my body, honoring my values, and giving myself so much more grace than I ever did, because I've learned that it is in that ease, in this gentleness with myself, that I'm able to show up more often with more energy and more resources to help others. And I can make sure the pleasure that is leading my life is sustainable and fulfilling.
You know, Helene, I'm glad you brought up about pleasure because let's be realistic. Pleasure is kind of one of those taboo words for most people because immediately they think that it has to do with baseballs, baseball bats, and filling tacos, if you catch my drift. And so, Helene, what did it take for you to learn to incorporate pleasure again, considering the significant loss of your mother? And also, how can others learn to incorporate pleasure into their everyday and remember that that is the secret ingredient to really finding fulfillment again in life?
I'll start with your first question, which is how do you, and I think this is true for a lot of us going through grief. There's always resistance I find with like going from the harder parts of grief, like the sad and the anger and the devastation. And the second we start wanting to reincorporate joy in our lives, we can start feeling a little guilty about that, right? Because it's like, well, how can I be happy when something terrible just happened? And the solution philosophically is not viewing it as an either or mutually exclusive concept. Like you encompass multitudes, and these people who've passed on, whose legacy live on within us, whatever kind of grief you're going through, the career that you had, however short-lived, served a purpose and was time and energy and effort and love well spent. And I would hate to see that go to waste in the sense of it doesn't get to live a second life through your joy. It doesn't get to live a second life through your new experiences and the novelty. And so for me, it was also remembering that my mom was someone who who was led by her pleasure and her joy. And like she loved what she valued. She loved the nice things in life. She didn't have we did not have much money at all growing up, but she would always love to design something. Like she would use a scarf to tie up some curtains, and she would repurpose things out of cardboard just to make it like look avant-garde. And it's in those little subtle micro shifts. They didn't cost anything. They weren't your stereotypical definition of pleasure either, right? They weren't related to physical sensuality in any way, but they were a deepening of the intimacy between her and the outside world. And so when I think of pleasure and, the analogy that you used and how others can incorporate it, it's not just in this physical sense of how do we get that dopamine hit by interacting with another human being. It's how do we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, intimate, and build a collaborative relationship with our environment and the world around us so intimately that it can't help but feel pleasurable to be a part of it because we are always co-creating it. Like we are present to it. And so I think microdosing pleasure and microdosing authenticity, like in the analogy, I'm not talking about any substance, I'm talking about showing up a little bit more silly, a little bit more goofy, a little bit more like that version of you when you're 7 years old that just didn't have a care in the world and was running around the backyard, you know, playing make believe or climbing into trees. Like that's the version I ask people to reconnect with when they first start out on this pleasure-led path, because there is the lack of inhibitions of a child that allow us to reconnect to what brought us joy before we were told, to restrain ourselves. And so that's what I would tell people to do, is reconnect to that version of you that was joyful and childlike and carefree.
Oh, yeah. Rekindling that curiosity of a child mindset, right? Because I think to your point, people have told us that we had to grow up, right? That that's for little kids. But realistically, that 7-year-old version of us is still here, right? And we were carefree, right? We ran around in the backyard and said the sky was falling, or that, squirrels had wings. I'm talking about Super Mario, but like, we had those imaginations, those simple things that brought us joy. Right. And the thing that I love about children, Helen, is that children teach us how to be present. Right. And I think that's another thing that continues to hold so many people prisoner from really attracting, right, and shedding that limiting belief that they can't be more than what they are. Would you agree?
I'd 100% agree. And it has to be presence first and foremost, because otherwise we find ourselves chasing an external source of pleasure, whether it's
Hmm.
scrolling on our phone, whether it's that really good TV show, whether it's, going to the club. If we think pleasure always lies outside of ourselves, we will create a dependent relationship to the outside world that decenters us, that excludes us from the narrative and makes us feel like, it reinforces that we are beholden and almost a victim of life circumstance, which is fine when the circumstances are great and you're having fun at the club or you're watching your favorite TV show. But what happens when the circumstance is the state of current affairs in the world right now? And you don't have any way to resource up internally and find pleasure within and co-create it with the world around you and be the source of it. So I think that's why I talk about creating sustainable self-expression and personal fulfillment, because it's not just getting those one-hit wonders. It's becoming a source of, like, almost like a well deep within you that you get to consistently nourish and tap into. And from that, you get to pour into others and offer them sustenance when they don't have some. But there's something that you said, Portia, that that stuck with me, which is realizing that that 7-year-old is still within you. And when I talk about people reconnecting to their inner wisdom, it's remembering that even that version of you that was doing that had a stint with television for a short period of time, right? That version is still in you. The part of you before the grief, before the transformation, my mom is still within me. The who I was before I lost my mom is still within me. Transformation is not always this shedding and discarding far away from us. It's a lot more like pruning the tree and then turning that wood into the compost that nourishes the soil. Like it always stays within us, and you're always honoring the legacy of your hard-won battles every time you choose to be joyful anyway.
Well, and I love to say integrating, right? I love to
Yes.
say that we are learning to integrate the lost versions of ourselves into our everyday because they're still there, right? And I'm curious, Helen, one of the things that I often talk about on this show is grief, right? And learning how to integrate the past versions of ourselves, the dreams that didn't go in the direction that we wanted to go, right? The relationships that fell through. And even, let's be realistic, there's grief when you leave from corporate to become an entrepreneur, right? And I'm curious, Helen, for our audience, what did it take for you to integrate all the different losses that you've had into who you are today? And also, what continues to keep you afloat, especially on the hard days, right? We're in the holiday season when traditions have changed for a lot of people. You brought up the current state of affairs where people are grieving the life that they thought we were going to have and the life that's currently present before us.
Absolutely. The first thing that came to mind when you asked that is community. And specifically, especially when you're starting out, finding people who can mirror and reflect back to you your multitudes. And you might not get that out of a single person, right? I couldn't turn to my family, for instance, when my mom passed away. That was the last place I could go looking for the integration of myself because there was only negative emotion and resentment at the time. There was only the version of me that they saw, which I thought was different than how my mom saw me. And I couldn't connect to myself by looking that way. So you might have to go find new folks to interact with you. And I joke about it all the time, but sometimes you do have to kind of leave your current environment and go be a stranger somewhere and do it within your realm of privilege and what you can access. But for me, I went to the Himalayas for 20 days and trekked with 19 strangers. And that changed my life and my self-perception because for the first time I was surrounded by folks in a group setting where I didn't have any responsibility. Like you mentioned, I'd been in the military. I had been in lots of group dynamics and group environments, but usually there was either an impression I had to leave, we were being ranked against each other or graded, I had to be a leader in some capacity, I was responsible for something. And for me to shed the identity that I'd strongly held onto of being the responsible one at all costs who couldn't be vulnerable or weak, I had to go and find an environment where I wasn't responsible for anything. And I had to let myself be seen when the duty no longer fell to me. Like, who am I when I don't have to do anything? Who am I when I just choose to be myself? And being seen in that way and having the friends there and the folks there view me through that lens and like what they saw and encourage it and still take care of me and still let themselves be taken care of by me because I'm a very nurturing person, but it came from a place of wanting to rather than having to. And so that's what I mean when I talk about community being that thing that helps you integrate is I think we need to be reminded of how many facets we do have, and a mirror is a really gentle way of doing that. And if you can't find that in your immediate community, if your friends currently don't do that for you because they only remind you of who you used to be, encounter new strangers. If you're in a position to be able to hire professional help, whether it's a therapist or a certified coach, I highly recommend it because that is another lens it's another spotlight and genuine attention you get to put on who you are and help you integrate that. But then in sustainment, when you asked about, long term, what do I do? when the holidays come, when hard times come by. It is that. It's sometimes being the first one to reach out and be vulnerable and check in with other folks who maybe are going through the harder times, and reminding others that they aren't alone reminds you that you aren't alone. Like very unconsciously, it's like just by showing up for other folks, giving back, rather than just isolating, is a gentle reminder that, we all struggle for different reasons, but in very similar ways in the society. And, there is joy to be found in solidarity through the hard times. So find your people is the long and short of that.
No, and I agree with that 100%. Finding people who will hold space for you, right? People who will let you cry on their shoulder and not judge you, right? Also, the people who will hold you accountable, right? Because when you're grieving a significant loss, you don't have time for the platitudes, right? You don't have time for the people that are going to say that they're there, but really they're not, right? I've been in the same similar boat as you, Hélène, with family, right? The ones who know the person who is transitioned would be the ones who, quote unquote, we think should hold space for us. But we have to remember that they're also grieving too, and their grief looks different, even though we lost the same person, right?
Yeah.
So being open to finding that new community, right? Whoever that might be. Also, what I found for me, I often left the house every day for 30 minutes, even if it was taking a walk or driving to the lake, and just being away from the environment where a lot of memories and things are housed, because sometimes that can keep you trapped as well. So being intentional. And then also what I found also that really helped me to pour back into me was I listened to a lot of audiobooks, and I read a lot of
Mm.
different books on grief, right? Because that was filling my spirit with validation that I was okay where I was, and allowing myself to go through the different phases of my own grief journey and choosing, right? That's the other thing that people forget about, is the power of choice. You get to choose how you grieve, whether it's you're laughing at things or if you're crying a lot, right? I think a lot of people are afraid of their tears, right? And that's a whole conversation for another day about the relationship between ourselves being vulnerable and being able to express, right? Because tears
Mhm.
are a form of communication, right? And I think we've been conditioned to only allow tears in certain circumstances, but not all are given the same pass. Hélène, for our audience who's tuning in, I'm sure there's going to be individuals who would love to connect with you and work with you to help them to break down those walls of hiding and really fully embracing self expression without limitations. So, how can our audience connect with you, Hélène?
Thank you for asking, Portia. So if you are someone on social media, Instagram is a great way to stay in touch. It's at Hélène Can Help, HELENECANHELP, which is also the name of my business. So if you Google that, you will find my website as well. And both of those places will lead you to a soft place to land that I've created called Le Salon, the Salon. And that is my free community for folks who are either ambitious rebels, really unlearning the hustle, or, spiritual seekers who are trying to live a more fulfilling existence. It's a gentle place to land if you want to stay off of social media, because it's a group chat kind of held in a Telegram community where I drop weekly insights. And it's totally free to join. And that's where I love to send people, especially if they're just starting out and they want to get a better feel for what it's like to be held and witnessed in my world at no cost to them.
Well, everybody, you can definitely follow Hélène, like Hélène said, on Instagram. Obviously, Google is your friend. If you forget, just do a Google search of Helene's name, and I'm sure that you will find Hélène wherever you search. Well, everybody, that was Hélène Caniac that you heard from today on Grew with Portia. And that concludes another episode. And until next time, everybody, peace and hair grease.